Hello there and welcome to Black Jackal Gaming. The next balanced data slate is about to drop, so we're going to take a look at the Space Marine options and which one of them need help. So we're in a relatively balanced meta at the moment, and Space Marines are relatively middling, they're doing okay. But there's certain units that do need a bit of a point decrease to have a bit of internal balance. And some of the special characters in the smaller chapters, such as the White Scars, they're struggling to find purpose in the game. Melee weapons across 10th edition are all really struggling, but especially in Space Marines, they just don't hit hard enough. And some of the detachments, they need a little bit of help, so we'll look into that. First up, we'll take a look at the units that need the points lowering slightly. So we'll take a look at the Outriders. They're currently 95 points for a unit of 3 or 190 for 6, and you have to add on 70 points if you want to take an ATV with them. They already had a points drop, but they could do with coming down a little bit more because they don't really actually do much. They're a melee unit that just don't hit that hard. They could come down by 5 points per 3 models, and the ATV really could do with coming down by 2 points because it doesn't really have that much output. Next we have the Redemptor Dreadnought. He's actually quite a good model, it's a good data sheet, but a tad on the expensive side. He's paying a tax for being quite a flexible unit, but there's a lot of variable shots, so sometimes he's just not as efficient as you'd like him to be. So he could come down by about 10 points really to make him a little bit more competitive. The Brutalis, the melee version of the Redemptor, is a bit on the pricey side at 175 points. Its melee output isn't quite high enough to pay that premium. It does have the multi-motors, but when you largely want to get this guy in combat, it makes them a little bit redundant, so he could do with coming down by about 10 or 15 points just to make him a little bit more efficient. Then we have the Centurion Devastators, which are very expensive, 175 points. If you drop them by about 30 points, they would still just be probably an okay unit. You wouldn't even lean into them that much. You wouldn't see them on the tabletop that often. They wouldn't be common. They could come down a little bit further, but I can't see a 40 to 50 point drop for this unit, even though it's just not that competitive. There's the Blade Guard Veterans. They already had a price drop as well, but they are really struggling due to the model count in the unit. There's an issue with them not being able to get into the Impulsor with a character to support them, because they do really need a character to support them because they've only got strength 5 weapons. At 90 points for 3 and 180 for 6, you're just going to struggle to really get much efficiency out of them within the game. If they come down by another 5 to 10 points, that would really help. But they could do with a slight rule change just to allow them to be in an Impulsor with a character. Just find a way to bend the rules so they can get that supporting character in there with them. Otherwise, they need to change to a 5 to 10 man unit. Unfortunately, that's not how they're currently packaged, so it's very unlikely to happen. Finally, we have the Stern Guard Veterans. They did take a small price drop in the last data slate, but that was due to the fact that Space Marines lost 4 rerolls for the Oaths of Moment target, and this has made them really struggle because their entire data sheet was based on re-rolling wounds. Being that ballistic skill 4, only one shot with rapid fire 1, they don't have a lot of firepower, so they are really struggling in the meta because they need the re-roll to hit, the re-roll to wound, and a couple of buffs just to get their output to the level where they can actually do what they're supposed to and tackle elite infantry units. They need to drop down probably by a further 10 points. Moving on to special characters, they're actually okay point price based on the data sheets, or leaning slightly high in some cases, but the main issue with them is really that you lose access to the other special characters and other units if you decide to take them. The Salamanders and Imperial Fists, they're not in too bad a position because they do have 2 characters apiece and they're quite good data sheets, and they're fairly priced, and they do lean into the detachment rules quite well, so you can make the sacrifice of other special units and characters because these aren't actually too bad. Iron Hands are 5 because Iron Father Feroz is completely okay. He's basically what they need, an additional Tech Marine for buffs, priced okay, and works absolutely fantastically within their detachment. But the other 3, well, we've got the Khan being White Scars at 70 points, Cantor 90 points for Crimson Fists, and Shrike 100 points for Raven Guard. You've sacrificed a lot to take them, and even though the data sheets are okay, they probably need to come down by 10 points for the Khan, 15 for Kanten, 20 for Shrike, just to make up for the fact that you are making sacrifices to take them. So they are probably then priced slightly cheaply, but you've got to make a sacrifice to actually take them. So the efficiency of your army is going to go down by taking them, but the balancing act is the cheaper than they should actually be. It wouldn't be too bad if there was more chapter-specific units or characters, if GW stopped focusing on some of the more popular chapters and released a couple of additional units and characters. Then the characters would be completely okay priced, and you wouldn't really have to look at internal balance around them, because they'd be more a viable option because you don't make such a sacrifice to take them. So when it comes to melee weapons within Space Marines, they're currently quite weak, and it's difficult to lean into because there's not many ways to buff them. Now you can buff certain attacks and +1 to wound, but there's not much you can do to actually increase the damage output. And with them being relatively low strength, it makes it really difficult to take on the tough opponents. So even if you had a points drop, you'd still have a bit of difficulty tackling your toughness 10, 11, 12 opponents. The lack in keywords across the board, very few of the melee options actually have any keywords, so they're falling behind the range options in that way. And if you give them some keywords, it would bump them up a notch, so it would make them more of a viable option. So go across some of the melee options and see what keywords we could potentially add just to make them a little bit more efficient. So first up, we've got chainswords. If they gain sustained hits 1, this would really help them when they're tackling infantry units. Having the -1 AP is nice, but that's really the only difference in an additional attack between them and just punching someone in the face. So the sustained hits 1 would be a nice option. Power and relic weapons are a little bit on the weak side. They kind of seem to not have a place. They might be designed just to take on Space Marines really, but if they're not mastercrafted, sometimes they are only damage 1, which isn't helpful. So they could do with maybe gaining the anti-infantry keyword where they wound on a 3 and 4+. Now they're usually strength 5, so this wouldn't make a massive difference when tackling the likes of Space Marines or your standard guard. But if you are tackling tougher options such as Tyranid Warriors or Cataphractii Destroyers or Marines in Gravis armor, this then just gives you the option to be slightly more efficient into them and be able to cut through armor, as really they're designed to do. Moving on to Power Fists, if they gain lethal hits, that would give them a great option. Currently they've got a very similar datasheet to a lot of the options such as Thunderhammers and Chain Fist, and there's just a minor difference to them. And with Chain Fist coming with the anti-vehicle keyword, you've not really got an option of taking the Power Fist if the Chain Fist is actually there, because they're identical in every other manner. Then we've got Thunderhammers. Them being weapon skill 4 really hurts them. Again, they've got the same profile as a Power Fist, but they lose 1 attack. They go to weapon skill 3, but the gain of damage is not really, and they get devastating wounds. But being 3 attacks, weapon skill 4, you're not really going to be getting the devastating wounds off, so it's kind of a red herring of a keyword. So if they knock them down to weapon skill 3, it activates the devastating keyword a little bit more often, but not too often. And if you give them anti-monster 4+ to give them an actual purpose, because there's no anti-monster within really the Space Marine Codex, so a lot of your anti-vehicle things aren't going to play well into the likes of Tyranids and some demons, so to give them an anti-monster option would be quite nice. Looking at all the Dreadnoughts, they mostly miss a sweep option, apart from the Brutalis, which does have it, so it'd be nice if we give them some extra attacks with the extra attacks keyword, and this would be maybe via Armored Feet, so give them 3 additional attacks, strength 6, 0 AP, 1 damage, just to allow them to move chaff out the way a little bit easier. I mean, they're still only weapon skill 3, so with this you might kill 1 or 2 additional guards, so it's not bumping them up too much, but it's just allowing them to clear the guff out the way when needed. Next we have Lightning Claws. They do currently have Twin Linked, which is quite nice, but to set them apart a little bit more, it'd be nice if they gained either Sustained Hit 1, just to make them a little bit more lethal into your infantry units, to make them be able to guarantee cleaning out guard units. You want your 5-man Terminator squad to be able to kill a guard unit almost guaranteed. or you could swap this for anti-infantry 3+, just so the sustained hits might make them a slightly too powerful, but by giving them anti-infantry 3+, possibly even 4+ if you don't want the elite units to be too damaged by them, it just gives them a little bit more efficiency into the units that they've been designed to take on, really. Last up, we have force weapons. They are currently slightly weaker than your mastercrafted power swords, so it would be nice if they just gained an additional -1 AP just to make them a little bit stronger. They do have the psychic keyword, so there are plays with that, not as many as you'd expect, but it's still quite a nice option. So the additional AP would really put them in a space where they're a viable melee unit, as well as having their psychic attack as well. Finally, we'll take a look at the detachments. So the Vanguard and Iron Storm are fine. They're in quite a nice place. They don't really need much fine tuning. The Iron Storm is probably leaning a little bit too much on the heavy side, especially if you decrease points value for certain units or amend some data sheets. It might push them through the ceiling, so I would possibly look at changing their detachment rule, which is currently reroll a hit, damage or wound roll per phase. I'll change that to per turn per unit, just to minimize the efficiency on that for future balance. The Anvil Siege Force is in quite a nice place, I think. It's a little bit underutilized. It is slower than some of the other options, which holds it back a bit, but I think it's still a viable option. If you drop the war gear by 5 points, you're more likely to take probably maybe all 4 war gear options. It just puts them in a slightly more efficient place. The Gladius detachment is fine. It's got a bit of an outlier with the fire discipline being a bit too good and now a bit too pricey. I'll drop the crits on 5 on it and lower the points value by 20 just to bring it more in line, because if there's any future changes to points values or data sheets, this could really go through the roof again. So instead of just continuously upping the points value of this war gear and units that can use it, I'll just change it, make it weaker and make it cheaper, so you don't have to worry about it in the future. Following this, we have the Storm Alliance Task Force, which isn't too bad a detachment, but it is geared too much towards mounted units really. So if it included the jump pack units and war gear and stratagems, it would give more options available, a little bit more flexibility in your style of play as well. Then we have the Firestorm. This is actually not too bad a detachment. I quite like it. What I would do though was lower the cost of the Immolation Protocols strat, because it's currently 2 CP. I'll put it down to 1 CP. If you wanted to leave it at 2 CP, you'd have to include Motor in it as well to give that devastating wounds. 2 CP is quite expensive unless you're really running max size aggressors or the Infernus units. But if you're not, it's quite expensive. I'll drop the points for the 2 expensive war gears by 5 points just to make them a little bit more viable. Finally, the First Company Task Force, which probably needs the most help out of all the detachments, is a bit on the weak side. I'll change the detachment rule, which currently gives you the rerolls, full rerolls into your Oaths of Moment target, and that's 1 to game. I'd probably change this to reroll once to wound against the Oaths of Moment, and that's for the entire game. I'd remove all the restrictions on stratagems that list at or below half strength to gain the benefits. Because of the size of the squads, as soon as you're hitting at or below half strength, they're not really going to have much damage output, so you're literally spending a CP for a little bit more efficiency, but they're not actually going to achieve much. I'd also remove the Terminator restriction on certain war gear, just so you can lean into potential Blade Guard veterans, Stern Guard veterans, Vanguard veterans a little bit more to buff them, rather than it being slightly centered around the Terminator squads. So I think Space Marines are actually in an okay position at the moment. They might not be touched at all. GW have said that they are going to focus more on internal balance this edition. Last edition it was literally, let's get factions into an okay position and then leave them alone if they're doing okay. Where there's quite a bit of the Space Marine Codex that isn't that viable in the competitive sense. It's either too expensive or is not efficient for its points, or it just doesn't have much damage output, or the abilities could be a little bit too much on the niche side, and some of the detachments do need a little bump up. We don't really want to just see 3-4 years of Vanguard and Iron Storm being used all the time, because the other ones are a little bit weaker. We want a little bit more parity across the codex. So you can use the units that you've got on your shelves and encourage you to buy more units so you've got more options to play rather than just maxing out three units of this a couple of times and then using that for 3 years, which can be a bit on the dull side. Thank you for watching the video. If you have any comments, then pop them below in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button as it greatly helps the channel. Hit the subscribe button to see any future Warhammer content. Take it easy and see you next time for more grim darkness from the 41st millennium.